the links to the alternative video platforms or support the channel. Join the channel, become a member, and join the Discord. It's a good way to keep in touch. So I was listening to a Confiscate live stream the other night, and I tuned in just as topic was getting very personal and very heavy. People were talking about being canceled from an industry. And it got me thinking about the necessity of a separate economy apart from the SJW control. And I think a lot of people are finally coming to this conclusion of you can't live subject to this insane levels of censorship where people are afraid to say anything, because what is acceptable now is certainly not going to be acceptable a month from now, because that's how cancel culture, cultural Marxism, Bolshevism, that's how it all works. It just spirals to the inevitable conclusion of putting people in re-education camps. Oh, that's just hyperbolic. Is it really? Because it's happened in the past. We have to have free speech. It starts with free speech. The ability to say 2 + 2 = 4. Everything flows from the ability to tell the truth. And we have to get back to a time when we didn't run to Twitter to bitch about every minor faux pas. No, society is always going to have little abrasive incidences. And most people realize it needs some sort of lubricant. And that's usually just people just rolling their eyes and moving on with their life, not immediately pulling out their cell phone and pouring pure oxygen into the engine of outrage. And ultimately, we can't do it with SJWs, which in terms of social media means that you might have to use Gab, which is pretty much like Twitter in all regards. I think they have the ability to edit, and there's actually has some more features than Twitter. You can time tweets, and you can join and become a verified member for like $100 a year. You can also host videos on Gab TV, which is connected to it. So it works pretty well, but it just doesn't have SJWs like almost at all. And when they show up, you can just ignore them, because the difference between Twitter and Gab is they can't get you kicked off on Gab. The only thing that gets you kicked off on Gab is actual threats of violence. And their ability to censor is where they get their power from. It's stored in their lady balls. Gab is a real perspective on what people are actually thinking. Twitter is so far left, it is completely removed from reality. Yeah, there are users on Twitter who are moderates or to the right, but they can't say what they're really thinking because they'll simply get kicked off. The way it works on Twitter is you get two examples, left-wing, right-wing people, and they're becoming like Twitter social media personalities, and they grow, they blow up, they blow up, they blow up. The difference is and there's like, I don't know, there's correlation spheres of like blue dots and red dots for what universe you're in, left-wing or right-wing Twitter. When the right-wing Twitter, and there's not a whole lot of crossover. If you're on the right-wing Twitter and you're blowing up, and blowing up, and as soon as you start to cross over into moderate and left-wing Twitter, you'll just get permanently kicked off the platform, because the rules are written against people who are on the right. Like if you don't believe in a lot of things, I think Tim Pool did this when he was talking to Jack Dorsey on Joe Rogan's show. A lot of things the right wing doesn't believe in. It's like, well, why should we be forced to use pronouns when it's technically a lie? You're asking someone to technically lie. It's like, well, that's just how the rules are written. So the rules on Twitter are supportive of left-wing ideals and propaganda. It's like Twitter's just a propaganda tool. So there are right-wing people on Twitter, but they're more in passive role. They're not putting forth ideas or rebutting ideas or countering ideas. It's pure Karen Schwartz and Shaniqua energy, just pseudo-outrage, just a bunch of whining cat ladies with PMS. Twitter has given very dumb people the ability to form a mob and go after anyone that is determined to be a target. And if you want to be real about it, the victims of cancel culture are most often going to be the beautiful people of the light. Right now, you've got the Travis Scott Astro World event where 8 people departed this mortal coil. That was in and out of the Twitter trending in a day. Don't get me wrong, they probably will try to cancel him because so many people got hurt. There are like 300 people injured, and he's got a history of inciting violence. But there is more anger against someone like Gina Carano than someone like Travis Scott, who actually watched people depart. All right, so their first example of outrage is fair enough. It was a little bit of an awkward tweet talking about his second kid with a different wife. But again, it's his wife, his kid. It's like, I'm sure he meant it well. So that's their first example of outrage. But the second example of outrage, and I'm saying there might be some validity to that. I mean, really, like I don't know. I look at personal life and like, why are you putting your personal life on social media? There are a bunch of actual sociopaths on social media who will take an internet beef and track you down and put a 308 in your skull because they're insane people, and they're insane people with access to a cell phone, and that's all it takes. But the other examples of things they're trying to cancel them for is when Chris, in 2020, an election year, yeah, we know because it was a year ago, joked to his followers that they should vote for this movie. And that's your number 2 example of outrage? Well, don't you see why it's problematic? You should vote for Hillary or Bernie or who was running in 2020. Oh, that Biden idiot. Oh, dear God. Biden's in the White House. So Twitter is a place for people to cancel people in things that either they don't care about or they care about in just a fleeting, momentary flash of neurotransmitters. But the tweets don't self-destruct. Oh, I think that's something you can do on Gab, is you can self-destruct tweets and time tweets for release. So all that negative energy just stays online forever. It's like Ghostbusters too. Yes, I'm going to relate everything to 80s movies. It's a weird second society of people who live their real life and then they go online and they have a hate orgy. It's like digital BDSM. It brings out the worst in people. And to be fair, anyone with a cell phone can get on Twitter. So you get people with varying degrees of mental illness, from people who believe that they're literally Lucifer looking for their bride, to mild levels of other cognitive impairments. Avoid that hot word there. But there are people on Twitter who will literally delete somebody over a stupid social media argument. People arguing about nothing on social media that can turn into a killing beef is just for a moment I experienced this crushing flash of depression, a yawning black hole of despair where I look at the dregs of Twitter and the gulf between someone like Elon Musk. The world needs more Elon Musks and less Pooty Snatch, sit on my face 666. Social media is such a cesspool. I can see where people occasionally wish that they could just push the world into the sun and be done with it. So I was listening to these Comicsgate guys the past 2 nights talking about getting canceled from the industry on Mondays and Tuesdays live streams. And these are real guys who were kicked because simply they're not SJWs. The industry does not allow conservatives, Christians, Europeans, or some combination of that. Yes, Mike Miller is a conservative Christian. He's not European, but he's still kicked. He's still persona non grata simply because he's some kind of hardcore Christian. But I mean, one of the nicest guys, right? For being 50% evil. There's no reason he shouldn't be in the industry, or Doug TenNapel, or Ethan, or John Malin, or R.T. Bear. All these other guys, they're just nice, normal people for the most part. They were blacklisted, which sucks because, for the obvious reasons, but it sort of worked out with the creation of Comicsgate. But the thing is, don't they have the right to work at DC and Marvel? Doesn't that bother anyone? I look at DC and Marvel now, and it's like that taste of ashes in your mouth, where it's like all joy that you once had in association with comics, it just kind of fades away when you realize what they've done. And beyond comics, but Hollywood also, the people who call the shots in both those industries are bad people, but they're also spineless people. Who's that guy? Toyota Kawasaki, or was it Ken Akira, I think? Oh, what a stupid name. They are legitimately left-wing SJWs, but they also think a Twitter mob matters more than it does. Sales matter. The bottom line, your financial return on investment sheets, whatever, those matters. Are you writing in black ink or red ink? Words on social media only matter to the extent that they can affect sales. Hate mobs can grow, but if sales are good, then literally just ignore the Twitter cat ladies and soy boys. If they weren't buying your product in the first place, they actually don't have as much influence. I mean, do they have influence or not? Are they affecting sales? A lot of these soy boys, they're not very persuasive because you look at them, soy people and cat ladies, you look at them and you're like, yeah, whatever you're pushing, I don't want a part of it because you just, you look like a whiny little bitch. So every minute you spend listening to a Comicsgate channel is a minute that you're not watching Disney Satanic World Domination Incorporated. It's just a propaganda machine, and they hate that. They absolutely want every 24/7, they want that attention. They want to be the ones to control the flow of ideas. So Comicsgate and Phantom Menace, yes, it pisses them off. Don't believe for a second that, we don't even know about those guys. They have no effect on the culture. Any minute is a minute of lost revenue. They don't want anyone to counter the narrative, which is why you don't have to be Nostradamus to predict that for channels like Nick Rekieta, Mr. Obvious, Mark Dice, Crowder, Paul Joseph Watson, a lot of others, it's only a matter of time before Google shows them the door. It's not exactly that those guys are some far right-wing guys like the channels got kicked off years ago, like Way of the World, Red Ice, American Renaissance. Those were, most people would legitimately consider those people at one end of the spectrum. But the thing is, they're pointing out flaws and inconsistencies in a left-wing narrative, whether it's in politics or in entertainment, because I don't know, one's downstream from the other, but it's really they're that yin and yang just constantly affecting each other. And Google is the one who's pushing a lot of that narrative. So why would Google host these channels that are countering a narrative? And here's how I'm always saying, like, get on Odysee. Yeah, Odysee is monetized. It's freaking awesome. I have a tiny little channel on Odysee, and just for the monetization on that with a 300 sub channel, I got $100 so far. That's pretty decent for. It's a channel that clones your YouTube channel. It's like you're not putting any more work into it, and you're getting paid from the ad revenue and donations. So put your stuff on Odysee, because eventually even Comicsgate and Phantom Menace channels will get kicked off. If you add up all the connection points between Comicsgate and Phantom Menace, it's a nice chunk of people. But here's the thing. They go, it's only a few 100,000 people. It's active people, very active people on social media networks. And Comicsgate Phantom Menace has a much greater ability to influence buying power than the Soy Boy Cat Lady contingent. For whatever reason, partially, it's not because we're such skilled at rhetoric or we're so much funnier. It's that we have the ability to be funny because we don't have the constraints of political correctness. Like, there are a lot of very smart people on the left, and they have the potential to be funny. But when the punchline of almost all their jokes is blonde man bad, they have these handcuffs around them for comedy. It's like, you could have a lot of these left-wing comedians who, if they were just free to throw a grenade at anyone and anything that moved, they could just burn the house down with comedy. But they're not. They're just absolutely not. So everything is got to be slanted against Christians, the whites, Republicans, Trumpism. Like, that's the majority of their humor. It's like, well, yeah, we've heard those jokes. Those jokes were old in 2016. Like, they were old 6 months into 2016. Those jokes were old. So I'm saying is, like, it's easier for us to control the narrative, to control the culture, if we have free speech, and we just don't have that on YouTube and Twitter. You're going to have to go to Gab and Odysee and Bit Chute to get that kind of stuff. We do the best we can on YouTube and Twitter, but, they shadow ban you first, and then they kick you off eventually. So it might only be a few 100,000 people on our side who have the ability to affect the culture and buying decisions. But they spread a counter narrative on social media that reaches millions of people. The Hollywood machine wants to spoon feed you poison like Disney Star Wars. Then somebody gives an interview about the Solo movie that came out between the films, and they're talking about Lando Calrissian. They say he's going to be BLT. And if you don't remember Star Wars from 77 to 81, 83, what are you even doing with your life if you've never seen the original Star Wars? He's kind of a ladies' man. He's got a cape. he's hip, slick, and cool, but he's also at least briefly portrayed in the movies and definitely in the books as an honorable person. Both Han and Lando were honorable, but he's definitely a ladies' man. And they're portraying him as like pansexual Lando, which they call him Pando. Pando Soy Child, as somebody who's in the Comicsgate community, I forget the guy. I think he's in War Campaign. That issue probably made Doomcock and Gary from Nerdrotic $250,000 in just outrage videos. But it also helped make Solo the first Disney bomb, all because of a counter narrative. And as it turns out, Disney would have a string of underperforming films, and trouble at the theme park, partially because of the gift from overseas. And now think about this. You got $1 billion Disney and $1 billion Google. These are, major shot callers. If channels on YouTube are causing problems with too much hate thought, how hard is it for someone at Disney to simply call up someone at Google and have them delete a dozen channels in the Phantom Menace community? There's always going to be potential for future relationships between Google and Disney at like the $100 million to $1 billion level. Do you think Google is going to go to bat for guys like Mahler or Gary's Nerdrotic? Google can snuff out all of the Phantom Menace in Comicsgate, and they would never notice it. What happens with Comicsgate is a sort of happening to Hollywood, especially when you consider the issue of the Wu flu and the treatment. I wonder if you're not going to see people who dip out of Hollywood because they don't want to take something every 6 months for the rest of their life. So what would happen is if you get people forced out of Hollywood, they could always start like an alt Hollywood, assuming that they can get a distributor to sell their product, their hashtag pureblood films or something. The cancellations are not ever going to stop. There is no mechanism to stop them. What works is lampooning the SJWs. They don't get comedy. One, they're not allowed to get comedy. They can't really take part in it. At another level, there's a lot of mental illness with SJWs where, they don't have a part of the brain to process comedy because they don't get sarcasm and they don't get double entendres and things like that. But if you call them developmentally disabled bundles of sticks on Twitter, you will get kicked off. So the public narrative is that people are on board with globalist films, shows, and comics because all dissent is suppressed. The left controls mainstream media and mainstream social media. The counter-narrative is shadow banned. So we'll go to Gab, Telegram, Discord, and what is happening is a parallel, misspelled, America. The globalists on Twitter and YouTube and the freethinkers on Gab, Odysee, Bit Chute. The left calls them a lot of things that are not exactly accurate. A lot of them are something else. It's a loosely coalescing ideology that hasn't really settled on a name or specific identity yet. They're becoming aware that there is a problem with the mainstream media and even the government. There are varying degrees of red pills being taken. They know there is a problem, but they haven't come to a solution yet. And when they reach that point, they may settle on an ideology. People looking at an America that is basically controlled by big tech and bankers, and they rightfully want to take that power away from those bad actors and return it to the people. The First Amendment is meaningless if we don't have free speech on the social media platforms, or we can't access banking or payment platform processing. We can't crowd funds to get that speech into other people's earballs because they're all left-wing platforms. And yes, libertarians, unfettered capitalism turns out to be kind of the same slavery as communism. Anyway, like, comment, subscribe, support channel if you can on Crypto, Coffee, and the others, and join Odysee, Bit Chute, Discord.